Welcome, everybody, to this week's Textile Talk. My name is Jody Quilella. I'm on the events committee of Surface Design Association, a membership nonprofit focused on contemporary fiber and textile art. I'm delighted to welcome you to this week's Textile Talk, Traditions and Techniques in Knit and Crochet. Textile Talks webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. Before we get going, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. This is a webinar, which means your screens and mics are not showing. We welcome questions, which we'll answer at the end of all the artist presentations. So please submit them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We are honored to bring to you free and inspiring Textile Talks programming. We respectfully ask that you be courteous as you engage with the speakers and the moderators and other participants. Your chat comments can be seen by everyone. Please use the Q&A for questions, chat box for greeting others, and survey for commentary are ways we can improve. If you prefer to not see notifications from the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on and off at the bottom of your screen. So today's presentation, we're here to celebrate the Surface Design Journal's Summer 2023 issue, Traditions and Techniques in Knit and Crochet. As Surface Design Journal editor Elizabeth Kozlowski writes, popular culture has apparently discovered what we've already known. The allure, some might say obsession, of age-old traditions and techniques for knitting and crochet. We'll also hear from hand knit designer, writer, and author Jeanette Sloan, founder of BiPunk Fiber, and Aynsley Grealis, also known as Knotted Neon. First, let's hear from Elizabeth Kozlowski, SDA's journal editor, who has a few words on how this issue came together.
Thanks, Jody, and welcome everyone today to our Textile Talk. So just a little bit of background about Surface Design Journal, if you're not familiar. The publication is published quarterly, and each issue focuses on a specific theme. So the Spring Journal started off our 2023 season and celebrates the 45th anniversary of SDA and the journal. And as Jody mentioned, traditions and techniques in knitting and crochet is the topic for the summer issue. Fall is dedicated to our international exhibition and print, and Seen and Being Seen with guest editor Rebecca Frank will be the focus of our winter issue, which is to highlight queer voices in fiber art. So the theme of traditions and techniques, it's always a favorite among SDA staff and our readers. And this issue was really so much fun to put together. So the inspiration for this issue came from an Instagram post, which you can see on your screen, by Ocean Knits, and it depicts crafting besties enjoying a swim with matching Tupperware, quote, so the crafting can continue, end quote. So the two friends are knitting and crocheting in the pool using Tupperware to keep their projects dry. So ingenious was the word that immediately came to mind. There's clearly no limit to our creative minds, and the summer issue takes our readers around the world to explore projects inspired by the traditions and techniques of knitting and crochet. And so our summer issue opens with a feature on the work of Indonesian knit and crochet artist Mulyana by curator John Silvis. So the artist prioritizes a creative and inclusive practice guided by their love for the environment. Next, we have frequent contributor and chief curator at the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Dr. Manuela Well-Offman. She shares how contemporary indigenous artists such as Kanupa Hanska Luger, Maggie Thompson, and Elaine Luluan incorporate crochet and knitting in their works in unexpected ways. Our departmental features are highlighted by Francois Denoy, a knitwear designer who's based in San Antonio, Texas, and draws from her Franco, Maori, American, Australian heritage to document her journey while living in the Maori diaspora. Swedish artists and authors Eva Zethraeus and Anna Bauer describe how nature became their safe haven during the isolation of COVID-19. And today, as Jody has mentioned, we have Jeanette Sloan and Aynsley Grealis with us to share their inspiration and creative processes for knit and crochet. So thank you, and I will hand the screen over to our guests.
So thank you, Elizabeth. That was a great overview. So now we're ready for our first presenter, British and hand knit designer, writer, and author Jeanette Sloan, and founder of BiPoc Fiber, a directory of Black, Indigenous, and people of color working in the fiber industry. Jeanette will talk with us about her making process and the importance of visibility. With a 30-year history as a textile designer, she's written for Line A, Vogue Knitting, and authored several books on hand knitting, and also creates patterns for the craft industry. So very busy. So Jeanette, please, welcome.
Hi, it's lovely to see you, Jody.
Jeanette will be showing us a little bit of a presentation of her work, and as she's talking about her process.
Yeah, so I'm going to do that just now. Hi, everybody, and I hope I'm not going to mess this up because you know how technology can be. So let's go. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read out what I was going to say because my memory is terrible. So here we go. So I've called this presentation, oops. Sorry, go. That's better. So I've got this presentation, my process, and the importance of visibility. I've been a maker for as long as I can remember, having inherited the creative gene from my parents, Margie and Sam. Mum and Dad were born in Barbados, and they were both highly skilled makers. Mum knitted, sewed, crocheted, cooked, and tatted, which is something I've never managed to conquer. While Dad was a gifted shoemaker, carpenter, and a qualified electrician. So this is a picture of my parents here. As you can see, they were a pretty slick couple. And behind that is a photograph. It's actually a jumper that I think my mum designed. It's a long Aran dress that she knitted. And I still wear that now. She knitted that when she was pregnant with my brother, who is now 62 years old. So even as far as back then, my mum was a creative woman, even though she trained as a nurse. She was remarkable in that she could pretty much turn her hand to anything. And this is one of the only pieces of knitwear that I still hold on to that she made. In the 30+ years that I've been a textile designer, my practice has spanned a variety of roles and fiber-based crafts, from machine and hand knit design, embroidery, making props for the advertising industry, to producing ready-to-wear hand-knitted accessories under my own labels. Sloan made, this is some of my more recent work. These are machine knitted on a very fine gauge in semi-industrial knitting machine in lamb's wool, and then they're felted or fulled and then reinforced. So they're not like your typical knitted handbags. They're much more like fashion handbags. And this was, I used to have a label called Dup Dup, which actually preceded Sloan Made. And this combined both hand knitting and machine knitting, sometimes within the same projects. For the last 20 years or so, the focus of my practice has been the craft industry, specifically designing patterns for hand knitters. It's a direction I hadn't foreseen my career moving towards, but one that allows me to celebrate and honor the rich crafting heritage into which I was born. In that time, I've developed a colour aesthetic that's become essential to both my process and my design identity. For me, everything begins with colour and texture. There are certain colours that I gravitate towards, others that absolutely repel me. I'm a bit like that with techniques, some that instantly inspire and others that I hate so much I find it hard to create anything at all. So I just avoid them. I won't mention any specific techniques. As Surface Design Journal editor Elizabeth Kozlowski has noted, the recent COVID lockdown has caused a lot of people to rediscover crafts, handcrafts, and finally catch on to what so many of us have known for years, that working with our hands has benefits beyond the aesthetic, and that knitting isn't the preserve of the over, insert whatever age you feel typifies a knitter. My work takes knitting, a traditional heritage craft, and infuses it with my love of bold colour and a passion for embellishment. Now, when I first started out as a designer, I'd pore over these books, the Barbara J. Walker's Treasury series. I was introduced to these by one of my tutors at college, and they absolutely fascinated me because I'd never seen anything like them. I'd never seen such a wide range of stitches, and there were some techniques in there that I didn't think were possible to achieve with hand knitting. Most notably, and the thing that sticks out in my mind now, are the cables, I think, that are in the yellow book. One of them specifically is a peace symbol and a circular cable. I had never seen a circular cable before. So I became really fascinated by these books, which is why I bought all 4 of them. And what I found in these books, coupled with the projects that my mum made, including the green dress that I showed you previously, showed me what could be achieved when you advance from the simple combination of knit and purl. I often used to begin my designs by flicking through these books, looking for eye-catching stitches, complicated cables, and intricate lace that would sow the seeds for my next design. Using graph paper to deconstruct them helped me understand how they were structured, and more than that, how I could develop them into something of my own. That exploration of stitch has given me a curiosity for structures that inspires the blurring of boundaries between knit and crochet. And this can often be the spark that triggers my ideas. A good example of this is the Margie Shawl, which I designed for Liner's book, 52 Weeks of Shawls. Now, I'm actually wearing this shawl at the moment. It's knitted, it's a trapeze-shaped shawl that begins with quite a wide cast on and then widens out with stepped increases. Oops. Go. Widens out with stepped increases. The thing that I particularly wanted to make a feature of in this shawl was the center section here, which I designed to be a kind of blend of knit and crochet. I wanted it to make people look at it and think, is that knitted or is it crocheted? And I did this so well that actually I did a yarn festival last year where a lady was convinced that it was crocheted, despite the number of times I told her that it was knitted. And I knew that it was knitted because I'd made the stitch up myself. So I'm always open to new inspiration. And if I spot someone wearing a piece of knitwear with a particularly intriguing stitch, I've been known to surreptitiously photograph them wearing it. It may be a contemporary piece or an item from a thrift store. It doesn't matter. If it's piqued my interest, if it makes me wonder how it was done, then that's enough. For me, the journey has started. Sorry, I'm just going to try and move this bar out of the way without cutting off the zoom. There we go. Oops. Many years on from poring over those stitch dictionaries, my designs largely begin with a specific colour combination I already have in mind, or with explorative swatching as I try to interpret a texture or a pattern in knitted form. It may be an item such as a ceramic pot or a painting that's planted the seed for a collection, as was the case, or a painting, as was the case when I designed Modern Daily Knitting's Field Guide number 15 Open. So you can see that painting here, which is called The Dirty Burnie. It's by a Scottish artist called Victoria Morton. And what I loved about this painting was the riot of really bold color and the use of energetic mark making that the artist has made on top of such a dark background. Perhaps it's not the most obvious starting point for a collection of patterns featuring lace knitting, as that's generally seen as either a traditional craft, a traditional genre of knitting, and something that's particularly delicate. I try to subvert those ideas by intentionally choosing to work these designs in Aran weight yarns, as well as traditional lace weight, and with fibers including Angora, merino wool, and other natural-based blends. So here you can see a number of the colors and yarns that I was using. All of the yarns that I used in this book were dyed by Labby and Amy Gill of Labby and Amy. And here you can see almost like the documentation of the process. So a lot of my work begins with intensive swatching of my ideas. And here you can see some of the initial sketches next to my yarn choices, swatching, and then the actual finished designs. So this process took, I think, about 4 or 5 months to actually bring this collection together. So these slides kind of encapsulate all of those ideas into just a number of swatches. This was a swatch for one of the more complicated designs in the book, which was a stole. And here is the stole finished. For this design, I used a combination of the same yarn in different colors to create a very subtle marl, and also 2 different qualities of yarn. So there was a wool-based yarn mixed with an Angora, so that occasionally there were sort of blurred stripes. So there was kind of textural variation in the project as it was knitted. And this is swatching for what became the Mood cardigan, which is a 2-way design. It's a very simple construction, but it can be worn either with the rib around the waist, which you can see on the right-hand side of the model with her back to the wall, or with the rib around the neck. Currently, I'm working a lot with embroidery and a technique I call beaded color work. This is where glass beads are threaded onto the yarn in sequence prior to casting on, so they can be placed as the piece is knitted. This creates specific motifs on the front face of the fabric. As you can see here, it's kind of created a sort of central dart that gravitates towards the middle of the cushion on the left-hand side. And on the right, there's a swatch of that center square in progress. This technique is great because it's really gratifying to knit, and of course it satisfies my endless appetite for decoration. In the last few years, I've got into the habit of documenting my creative process with drawing and photography. Hard as it may be to admit, my memory isn't what it once was, and since having brain surgery some years ago, there have been times when I have absolutely no recollection of how I've made one of my own designs. So rather than stress about it, I've adapted to embrace the change. And as it turns out, it's given me a new insight because it challenges me to see my work from a maker's viewpoint rather than that as the designer of the piece. It's also useful for recording when things don't quite go to plan, as was the case when I was working on this design, which was also for liner, which is called the Tiara Shawl. So this slide shows how the shawl looked when it was finished. And this shows the progression of the shawl from a very, very wide cast on that narrows as the piece changes over the course of knitting lots of bobbles and cables and slip stitches. But while I was knitting that, I did actually make a massive mistake. So here on the right-hand side, you can see where I have just taken, oh, that's better, where I've just had to take the knitting back to unravel, particularly on the bottom, the sort of middle slide in the middle picture in the bottom center, where I've had to take rows and rows and rows of it back to unravel it and essentially re-knit it while it was on the very wide circular needle. I also like to try my swatches and samples onto a dummy and stand back from it just so I can get an idea of what it's going to look like when it's done. Another major change that's happened in recent years is my work with Bifocian Fiber. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Bifocian Fiber is a website and resource portal designed to amplify and celebrate the work of Black, Indigenous, and people of colour working in the fibre industry. Since launching the website, the overwhelmingly positive response to it proves there's a real desire to see crafters from all racial and ethnic backgrounds represented in the fibre space. BiPOC Fiber actually started as a relatively short list of BIPOC makers on my blog, and it wasn't something I'd envisaged turning into what it's turned into now, which is a growing resource of over 100 fiber-based businesses. Working alongside my colleague and our web developer, Alison Chu, our intention is for BiPOC Fiber to benefit everybody, both BIPOC and non-BIPOC crafters and users of it. It's not something that's specifically focusing on BIPOC and for BIPOC, it's for everyone to use and enjoy. Thinking back almost 50 years to when I was a child, and there were no visible POC crafters, and even when I was a teenager studying textiles at college, there was no visibility of BIPOC or POC makers. There have been major improvements in the visibility of non-white designers, makers, and fiber artists in recent years, but there's still work to do. Even now, opportunities aren't the same for everyone. BIPOC-owned businesses are still too often seen as less worthy of investment or promotion, and those compared to those owned by their white peers, and some BIPOC-led fiber festivals struggle to attract visitors. So as long as that continues to be the case, there'll be a place for BIPOC in fiber. We're relaunching our website later this year, and it will include a resource portal that is currently under development, as well as a merchandise shop, which will help to fund our work in the future. That's really important, particularly as my work with BIPOC Fiber, together with my many years designing knitwear, was the reason I was recently awarded a British Empire Medal in King Charles III's recent birthday honours list. If you haven't already visited the site because you thought it wasn't something that related to you, I would really encourage you to pop over and have a look. You never know, you may discover a new favourite indie dyer or designer. So visibility is something that's incredibly important, I feel, for all of us, particularly those of us who are underrepresented. As you can see here, this slide kind of highlights some of my more recent work, and it's encouraging because as a young child, it would have been difficult for me to become what I couldn't see. So it's great to see now that you've got books that feature BIPOC authors like Safia Talley, Yarn and Stitch, which is a book that was produced by BIPOC-led UK festival Yarningham, and the former First Lady Michelle Obama on the cover of Vogue Knitting. This is some of the work that I do for Liner as a writer, because again, it's important for us to get into spaces where BIPOC aren't normally seen. So Liner, for those who don't know, is a Finnish-based publication. And what I do with my column, Fiber Talk there, is to highlight the work of BIPOC makers and academics such as Rose Sinclair and Lissy and Rudy, whose work you saw previously and you can see in the journal. So I hope you've enjoyed that little glimpse into my world. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to answering any of your questions a little bit later on.
Thank you, Jeanette, for that great presentation. I thought I knew a lot about you, having done all the research, but no, I learned even some more. I can't wait to talk to you more later. So next up, we have the pleasure to talk to Aynsley Grealis, also known as Knotted Neon, and you will see why soon, who, if you haven't read the journal yet, of course. Ainsley pushes the boundaries of her practice and creates pieces that weave together the joys of creativity, nature, color, and playfulness. Ainsley's from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, Ainsley.
Hi. Oh, thank you. Okay. Hi. Okay, so my name is Ainsley, and welcome to my colorful and playful world of crochet. I'm a textile and crochet artist based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm traditionally trained as a painter, having graduated with a BFA in drawing and painting from OCAD University in Toronto. After graduating in 2020, I put down my paintbrush and began exploring crochet and fiber arts during sort of the isolation of the pandemic and trying to find some solitude and joy from crochet and eventually knitwear, which was actually a childhood hobby of mine. I really enjoyed it when I was younger and I kind of stopped. So it was nice to reconnect with that. My whole practice stems from a place of nostalgia, and I aim to reflect that in each piece I create. Next slide. So my current practice focuses on wearable art with whimsical, playful, and colorful motifs. I have been drawn to fashion for as long as I can remember. And when I'm not crocheting, I spend most of my time thrift shopping, listening to fashion podcasts, and planning out my outfits. But I was always afraid to push myself out of my comfort zone, which at the time was primarily two-dimensional art, specifically painting. And I started crocheting 3 years ago without a goal in mind, but just to have fun, especially after 4 years of being in school and being continuously asked, why are you making art, or what is the meaning behind this? I finally decided that I create to have fun, and that should be enough. So all of the pieces I create represent who I am and basically what's going on inside my mind. Yeah, in addition, oh, next slide. In addition to the joy of creating playful and fun wearable art, I'm drawn to crochet for its ability to be a sustainable alternative to fast fashion. Crochet can only be made by hand, and for me as a crochet artist, I put all of myself into each piece I make, one stitch at a time. I work with all types of fibers, ranging from cotton, acrylic to wool and mohair, but have been trying to use natural fibers whenever possible. For more structured pieces, such as my embellished balaclavas, which I'll be sharing next, I gravitate towards acrylic and cotton due to their wide range of colors and their ability to hold shape. Yeah, so for the next little bit, I'm going to be talking briefly about 3 different projects. The first being my embellished balaclava series, which may be some of my favorites. So next slide. Oh, wait, no, it's there. Never mind. That one.
I'm sorry, Ainsley. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Oh, no.
No, something happened. You're kind of far away.
There we go. My one
Thank you.
headphone fell out and I thought I could just fix that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So in the spring of last year, I began to see balaclavas trending online. And as a social media zoomer, I kind of saw this and had to jump on it. Balaclavas became a form of pandemic comfort dressing. Along with the rise of mask wearing, these otherwise unfashionable garments were mainstream. Inspired by this, I set my maximalist aesthetic to work and began making ornately embellished balaclavas. The first began with the floral balaclava and I taught myself how to make a myriad of flowers and turn myself basically into a frilly pink bouquet. These pieces have allowed me to push the boundaries of crochet, expressing myself in a whole new way. These bring such a sense of joy and happiness, which is what I aim to evoke in all of my pieces. The balaclava designs have since branched out into depicting many different scenes, such as a mushroom covered forest floor, which you can see in this slide, a magical realm of rainbow and stars, and a coral reef. So these ideas also unintentionally came from a series of paintings I did back in 2018, specifically this portrait I made of my sister, who is wearing a headpiece that is quite similar to a balaclava that I made. Having not realized that at the time, it's neat to see how these ideas can manifest in different ways and in completely different mediums. Next slide. The next series is where my love for painting and image creation merged with my newfound love of crochet, which brought me to tapestry crochet and sort of more color work. Once I discovered that I could translate images through crochet and knitting, I was even more enamored with textiles as a form of expression and beauty. The images I create vary from abstract nature scenes to figurative pieces that tell tales, but what they all have in common is color. My studies taught me how to think about art, color, and composition, valuable skills that I was able to weave into my crochet practice. Being able to translate these designs into clothing has been such a joy. And when I wear them, I get to feel like I'm wearing a piece of art, which is my favorite thing. Also for these pieces, because people tend to ask me as well, I use a program called Stitch Fiddle to chart out my patterns, which I find really helpful because otherwise I would be completely lost in sort of the intricacy of the designs. Next slide. Okay, so these are my newest sort of pieces. I discovered something called a loop stitch and I became completely obsessed with it. And these are basically just little crochet bags that look like animals. These designs definitely came from a place of nostalgia. I remember having stuffed animal bags growing up, and I still to this day am constantly finding these in the kids section of the thrift store. I'm all about creating pieces that allow for self-expression in every way possible, and these bags are the perfect cherry on top to represent that. They are fun, playful, and a little silly, but again, that's everything I hope to evoke, not only through the pieces I create, but also in every aspect of my life. Next slide. One of the biggest joys I've discovered since I began sharing my crochet journey online is how it's allowed me to connect with people through my art. I've been able to engage with so many other creatives, crocheters, and people around the world, and that's truly magical. It's so special to see the pieces I create have such a positive impact on others. I often get to hear comments like, "This made my day," or "You've inspired me to crochet," and nothing makes me happier. I love to see that my work has created a space for people to feel like they can express themselves and push beyond their own perceived creative limits. Next slide. So as I continue creating, I hope to shift my focus a little bit more towards teaching rather than selling. I would love to have the ability to sort of teach workshops or actually connect with people in a more meaningful way, and continue to spread my maximalist joy to anyone who wants it. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today and to listen to me sharing my work. Yeah.
Thank you, Ainsley. I'm so glad we're at this portion of the programming because now we get to do all the questions, because I'm sure there's lots of people who want to really dig into both you and Jeanette about your work. I have a couple of questions myself. If I'll start with Jeanette. Jeanette, you mentioned when you were talking about the BiPOC fiber, you were mentioning how important it is for everyone to know that it's for everyone, that the resource is there. And so how, I touched on this a little bit, but could you go deeper into like how you what would make you happy, how would people use this in a way that would make you happy? Like would they?
So,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's funny because I guess because it's called Bifocian Fiber, a lot of people think that if they're not BIPOC, it's not relevant to them. But we're just asking that it's almost like widening the pool of fiber talent that you would be shopping from. I mean, it just widens your gaze, really. So, we're used to perhaps going to fiber festivals and seeing the same people, or looking in magazines and seeing the same businesses advertised. Well, it's just a way of actually bringing somebody else to your attention in a corner that perhaps you wouldn't normally look in. So it's just kind of saying, would you know what, have you ever thought about looking at this? Because there's bound to be, with things like social media, what it's like with the algorithm. You can be following thousands and thousands of people and seeing the same thing over and over again, because that's just how it works. it's an opportunity to just kind of go, do you know what? I'm going to try something different. I'm going to look somewhere else and just be open to what you find there. And you don't even necessarily have to shop, because not everybody has disposable income. It could just be that you find somebody and you think their work is fantastic, but perhaps if it's a crochet designer, like, you know, Ainsley, for example, when you don't crochet, you can still support their work by, you know, flagging up on Instagram that you've seen this fantastic work and you want to share it with other people. Supporting people doesn't necessarily always mean that it's a financial commitment. It can be talking about it on a blog, word of mouth to a friend, or just sharing a link on Instagram or Facebook.
Yes, and opening it up so that other people can become aware of this great resource. It's like you're opening up these diverse cultures, and it's all over the world as well. And
Yeah.
I found myself just seeing things I never had really thought about before. So
Exactly.
I found that to be really inspiring as an artist myself.
Yes.
I'm wondering, has there been someone that you've met as a result of putting together your database who surprised you, inspired you, or gave you that experience that we're talking about?
So many people. I mean,
Yeah.
Lissy and Rudy, I interviewed them for Liner and instantly fell in love with them. They are just, you know, I interviewed them over Zoom and they are so lovely. Their work is fantastic. Actually, Alison, who I run BiPoC Fiber with, we didn't meet. We actually indirectly met because of BiPoC Fiber, even though it wasn't called that at the time. She messaged me through Ravelry after I'd made the initial list of BIPOC makers on my blog. And she said to me, if you ever want to do anything with this information, I think what the phrase she used was, I'm kind of good with data, which is the biggest understatement in the world, because she's brilliant. And she built and designed our website. So, you know, there are so many people. I've never felt more connected to people, and that's kind of ironic given how separated we've been over the last few years.
Right. Yeah.
But I've never been more connected with people in this industry as I have since we started BiPoC Fiber. It's really exciting.
Oh, well, I can't wait to dig into it even more, and everybody else will too. There are more questions for you, but I thought I'd go over to Ainsley. Ainsley, we have someone asking you if you sell your work, which I know you do, and do you sell your patterns for the poodle type purses?
Yeah, I'm currently actually working on a pattern for that specific bag. Yeah, so I'm trying to get more into pattern making, so it's a process, but it's been fun to sort of delve into. So yes, one will be coming.
Well, I noticed on Instagram where there may not be written patterns available, you do video yourself making. So a lot of people who know how to crochet can follow what you're doing. That's a very generous act.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah.
Do you
It's
get a
fun to
lot
sort of share?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fun to sort of share like the process of creating something.
And Jeanette, there's a question for you about, do you make all your own designs as originals? Which
Everything that I produce, I don't copy. I'm an old school designer, so you know, I'm kind of trained to create my own stitches or develop my own stitches. So I do a lot of stitch development and pattern development. So yes, and although I would love to knit every single thing that you see in the pictures, I don't knit every single sample because there just isn't the time. Although I did knit this one, and I knitted the Tira shawl, which is actually behind my computer, which is huge, but I do have people who help me knit the samples. But generally, it's also a way of me kind of really connecting with the design, because as I said in my presentation, my memory is pretty bad. So I like to knit my own samples as much as I can, because it helps me really connect with the design and kind of lodge it in there, because my memory is shocking.
Well, I personally have a question about your stitches and when you're designing your patterns. I'm a sculptor, so I see the sculptural qualities of these, and it really, really gets me excited. So I'm wondering, like, do you think three-dimensionally when you're designing? Do you sketch them like what you know the stitch to look like? So and
Yes.
so you understand how they go together, and then of course the material. So all of this is thought out ahead of time with
Yes.
your doodles.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it can vary with some. So if I show you, I'm just going to reach back and get this shawl. So this shawl, I knew before I cast on for this shawl that I wanted to do something that featured a rib, slip stitches I love working with, and something that was wrapped or bound in some way. So I think I drew that stitch and then swatched it and then knitted it. And I've recently done a design for another magazine that I can't tell you too much about because it hasn't come out yet. And it was based on a whiskey decanter. And I just thought, I'd love to do a stitch that looked like a whiskey decanter. And
Oh
I
my
didn't do
goodness.
it. So
Oh, I love
I've made one up.
So Ainsley, the way we're talking about like sculptural relief patterns with Jeanette's stitches, in yours it's composition and color and figurative things. How do you think these up ahead of time and sketch them, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I usually do sketch things up. I have like an iPad and I just sort of like draw it all out. But then sometimes I kind of just like make everything and then piece it together on a mannequin head if I'm working on like a balaclava to do that, because I haven't sort of delved too deep into like stitches. I still feel kind of like afraid of like getting too complicated with the actual like with stitching. But yeah, so I definitely like draw it out, or I just play around and place things in different places and see compositionally if it works and looks good.
Do you have any ideas about where you're going to go with this?
Yeah, I know, because I feel like I'm constantly sort of trying something new and different. And I feel like at some point I'm gonna like keep doing that, and then it's all gonna come together at some point, I can imagine.
I mean, because your process just feels so free.
Yeah, that's
And
how,
I imagine it's a very organic thing for you. Yeah.
yeah, it is definitely. Yeah, I keep it very just like playful and fun, and like oftentimes too, I'll start on a project and then I'll be like working on it and so excited about it, and then like one thing goes wrong and I'm like, okay, I'm pushing this to the side for now. I can't be bothered with it. I have like a pile of things that just didn't work out as well, so that happens. I'm sure we all feel that way. Exactly. There's those ones that like loom in the corner and you're like, "Ah, one day maybe."
I call those my follies. I have a pile of
Exactly.
those too. But
Right?
so let's see what else we have here. Oh, someone, Ainsley, wants to know if do you stuff your mushroom stems?
I do stuff the mushroom stems. Yeah, I do.
And then also someone's wondering if you've ever considered authoring or publishing a children's book.
Oh, I haven't thought about that, but that would be really cute. Maybe it's something I'll think of now.
Yeah, I think that would be a great.
That'd be cute.
Jeanette, when creating lace patterns, are there or what are the hard and fast rules?
If you take it away, you got to replace it.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's it.
It's the law of physics.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just going to get narrower. Even if it's not immediately, you have to eventually replace it. You have to think of a way of replacing if you're taking away.
Well, that's great thinking on your feet. That's really good. All righty. Oh, and someone, Ainsley wants to know what program do you use for your tapestry charting out the colors?
It's called Stitch Fiddle. You can just like type it in online and it's there. So it's like a free program that you can use, and you just input your design or image into it, and you can decide like how large of a project it is, and do a swatch sample. It's very helpful for color work, I find. And if you're doing sort of like more of a standard stitch, you know.
I have a question. that for both of you actually, because Jeanette, you said you do the machine stitch knitting as well. And I wondered if there are any programs out there that you, as a crocheter who's been getting in more into garments, if either of you know of any programs that you're, you go to when designing garments. It could be for knitting and or crochet. Ainsley as well. I assume you made your necklace and your vest are fabulous. I think lots of people have commented on that.
Oh, thank you.
So programs that come to mind.
Yeah, I think I probably really just use Stitch Fiddle.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the one that I gravitate towards the most.
For my charting, I use Stitch Mastery, and when it comes to shaping, I'm still old school, so I will use graph paper and calculate it.
Okay.
Draw it and do it that way. So I don't use and I don't do a lot of garments, and any garments I do tend to be very quite sort of geometric in shape. So
I got you.
There's one that's completely slipped my mind. Stitch Mastery for charting. There's another one, but it's completely gone out of my head. If I remember, I'll put it in the chat.
That'd be great.
Yeah, Ainsley, so people are asking about your necklace, if you could talk about it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So it's little, like, I made tiny clothes, if you can see it. I just crocheted like small clothes and then strung them onto a necklace. I wanted it to be like a clothing line necklace. So it's a little like, yeah, it's just something I made one afternoon. I was like, that's fun. But yeah, with a tiny crochet hook and embroidery floss.
So, go ahead, Elizabeth. I'm sorry.
I think this question was asked to Ainsley about selling her work, and I think it's come up for you too, Jeanette. Do you sell individual pieces?
You want to answer, Ainsley?
What's that?
I was to say Ainsley can go first.
Okay. Yeah, I do sell pieces. I used to, when I first started, I kind of just like fell into it and was selling pieces. And then recently I've sort of stopped doing just like more running a store. And when I make pieces, I also sort of sell like one-offs here and there instead. It's just sort of better for my mental health, to be honest, than feeling the need to like keep up with orders, especially with like knitting or crochet. It takes so long. You can't you can't sell a piece for as much as, the amount of time you've put into it. So yeah.
So when I was running my little label Dup, I used to do all the production myself. So they were some hand knitted, some hand and machine knitted, and some machine knitted. And it's kind of quite nice when you do the first couple, and then when you've got an order for like 15 scarves, you just kind of like, so that kind of gets a little bit sort of demoralizing. And as Ainsley says, if you're doing something that's hand knitted, no one will pay you the time that it's taken you to knit that. So that's why I began doing patterns for hand knitters. And I've had non-knitters say to me, "Oh, would you knit me one of those?" And the answer is no.
Okay.
It's a hard no.
Yeah.
Because they tend to bulk at the price.
Yeah, sure.
I think we've become far too used to buying clothes very cheaply, and that's devalued handcraft, because everybody thinks that, well, I can get that for whatever from Uniqlo or Topshop or wherever. So yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And if you don't have the means to look at, say, like couture knitting, high-end brands like that, you have no idea until you make a sweater for yourself and you buy nice yarn, and then you frog it and it doesn't come apart and you have to throw it all in the trash, and then you're
yeah, then you learn.
Then you learn.
There's a question here from Cassandra, and she I'm not sure who she's directing it to. I think it's probably to both of you. Are there fibers that you prefer to use and hate to use? Go ahead, Jeanette.
Yeah, it looks like you have an answer.
You're ready to first. Acrylic. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry, Ainsley.
No, that is a-okay.
I think it's when I first learned to knit and I was 7 years old, I still remember knitting a red scarf, and it was this kind of red and it was acrylic, and I was so tense. And I remember pulling so tightly on the stitches, I can still hear that squeak of acrylic yarn on metal needles. You know, you kind of, so I don't use acrylic.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think I use mainly acrylic for like little like appliques and stuff, because it's not like rubbing on the skin, so it's different. Whereas like when I'm making something like for myself, I'm going and getting, I like merino wool to work with. It's soft, and like anything that I can go into the yarn store and just feel, and just like I feel a connection to,
Yeah.
That's what I grab. I'm not too particular. I'm just like, oh, it feels nice and I want it. So that's how I get it usually.
Well, and the color with acrylic is a different quality that really lends itself to your artwork. Yes, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So for that, it does work, but even I found recently too, using cotton yarn, there's a lot of places that offer like a softer, some are very like scratchy and I don't like, but when you find like a good cotton yarn, it's a nice sort of alternative to acrylic. It has a similar sort of like, I don't know, something. It's got like a structure to it, you know, it can really hold its shape a bit more than a softer sort of yarn.
We have another question here, and I believe this is for Jeanette. Does any graph paper work, or is it the knitter's graph paper only?
I do use knitter's graph paper only because the proportion's right, but I'll still base that on a swatch. So I know that if I graph out this many by that many, I know exactly how big it's going to come up because I've done a swatch first. So, but yeah, I do use knit. There's a really good site called the Knitting Site, and you can download, you can just print off knitter's graph paper, either portrait or landscape orientation. I still use that. It's great.
So I got a question in the chat that maybe I could answer, and they're asking if I research fiber arts in I have a master's in museum studies, and I will graduate with a master's in cultural anthropology this fall, and the answer is yes. So I'm really looking at identity politics through my research in anthropology, and I think we all share very similar stories, and like Jeanette speaking about her mom, that's where my inspiration came from as well. My mom taught me how to crochet and how to embroider, all the traditions and techniques in the fiber arts, and so it's part of who I am. And so I think it's a way for me to connect to individuals through the anthropological research. I use art as the inroad for my research, and I think that probably comes through in the journal as well. As we really strive to represent, a global community, a diverse set of voices in the journal and throughout the organization. And so I think I'm lucky that I have both a maker background and a lot of perhaps too much education. But I love learning. And so I think those two really go hand in hand. When you are, looking at a culture and understanding the ins and outs of a community, I think art is the best way to view those, view communities, why we do what we do. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I think we have one more question. I'm not sure if Paula is still here, but I'll just read it. I believe this is for Jeanette. I've tried to knit a few washcloths, which came out pretty wonky. Are there any avenues you would suggest to learn the skills necessary to follow a pattern?
You know what? I would start. That person hasn't said whether they use charts, have they? I think using a chart to follow a pattern is a really great way of getting in there. So when I was knitting a lot of jumpers as a kid, I was knit from a lot of the Rowan books, which always used to have everything that was charted. And it's great because it helps you, because it's a graphic representation of garment, it helps you make sense of where you are on the body or whatever it is that you're knitting, and exactly how much more you need to do and where you've gone wrong. So if there was a simple project that the questioner was asking, if they were looking for a simple project and they could get it charted, that would be great, because by having someone next to you saying you've gone wrong here, it enables you to actually mark off exactly where you've been and where you're going next.
Now, she just shared, Paula did, that she doesn't know what a chart is. Maybe you could describe that for her. And then we'll
Right. So a chart is literally almost like a graph. It's like a set of squares. So you've got your rows. Every knitted row is represented by a line of squares, and each square going across the stitch and each square going up is a row. And so say you had a bag that was 20 stitches by 20 rows, you would have a graph that was 20 squares wide and 20 squares tall. And you would follow each one of those, that project, you would knit across a row, and then you would cross off a line of squares, because you would have that line of squares represents the row you've just completed. And then you would turn your knitting around and purl back or pattern back the opposite way, and that would be your next horizontal line of squares. And so that, you know, that's a very simple explanation of what a charted design is.
And someone just shared a link to that information too, and it will be in the chat. But believe it or not, we're out of time. It's already quickly. But I want to thank you, two presenters, Jeanette and Ainsley, for attending today and sharing all of your great stuff. And I'd like to thank SDA and all the sponsors and everyone who attended today. It's been a really nice time. So I'll read a thank you to our sponsors for hosting us. And if you're interested in having a copy of this journal issue, it's available in the online store on our website, the SDA website. The recording will be available on YouTube in the next week. And for next week, tune in next Wednesday, August 9th, for the next Textile Talk, when Studio Art Quilt Associates sponsors a deep dive into SAQA's benefit auction, 12 artists' stories. That should be pretty good too. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.